Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parrotto. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parrotto.
Well, hello and welcome to Expedition Self. This show today it's picking up a few pieces from the conscious communication one that I did way back when. But this show is all about why conversations go wonky when you share your feelings. And we're going to talk about wonkiness in general today. I thought it would be a good subject for those of you who are, are you one of those wild ones who are invested in building the quality of your relationships, not just, trying to get along. And I picked that up. There's a new Keith Urban song out where he says, this is to all the wild ones. And then he lists this whole long set of, criteria. I think about that when I think about growth work. It's right. It's like, are you one of those people who, right? So today's show is for you. If you're one of those people who really, really cares about the quality of your relationships. And I just want to take a moment before we dive in and say quality of relationships to me is not just the people you've decided have value to you, but it's the idea that you are in relationship with life. And that means anybody who shows up, it means any aspect of life, like the nature of your relationship, that they matter such that your heart is always something that you're listening to. I think that's the thing about many of my shows is that I am making the assumption that you want to do more than just get along in the world. That you have a commitment to feeling this level of aliveness and connection that requires more than just existing. And that you bring this to more than just your significant other or your very closest friend. And, in truth, I feel like if we don't lean in towards this wanting, then we're kind of like, that was me blowing. We're just blown around like a leaf, during an afternoon breeze. And this happens in our relationships, too. As I think about blowing around, there were the people that were affected by the tornadoes this week. And I just want to send out a moment of care and what I would call purple healing in their direction. I'm so sorry when people's lives are disrupted like that. So, all right. I want to ask you this question in a really, really direct way, right? I just kind of set it up. Are you someone who wants the highest quality of connection in your relationships? And do you spend time thinking about who you are being and how you came to be who you are so that you can bring more of who you are to each moment and interaction? This conversation we're going to have today is all about how to get deeper and more connected in your relationships. And although I always talk about that in some form or fashion, I feel like this is going to be very specific. There's a lot of detail to what I'm going to talk about, and I'm not going to go in any order. So I'll just be kind of talking about one element that goes into the next element. So it takes thought, right, and attention and a willingness to be really honest about exchanges. So in this time right now, you might want to focus in on just a couple of interactions you've had in the last month or so, right, to help you plug into what I'm going to be discussing. Interactions when you had some feelings to share, something that was important to you, and you wanted to get into it in a conversation, or maybe you actually did get into it, right? Feelings that maybe didn't seem like they landed the way you had hoped. So this show, like I said, could feel a little all over the place. And in some ways, this is intentional because there are few absolutes when it comes to conducting a good conversation. And I mean good, like a deep, connected one. And so I'm going to talk about it in a way that says, Now, hold on, because this is going to go around. This is what you want to bring. And then I'm going to say, but if you bring it this way, then this could happen. And if this happens, then you want to go back to the beginning and do this, or try this, or think about this. So what I hope to provide today is a better understanding about how you can show up in the conversations you want to have, and also how to know when you've truly finished or gotten complete with conversations. Okay, so that's why I use the word wonky to describe today, because a lot of times that's exactly what happens. Things just go askew, like they lean to the left, woo, or to the right, right. And by the end of the talking, they just feel like they resulted in some wonky outcome, and both people often can leave not understanding what the heck just happened. I'm going to talk about the very subtle but impactful reasons that this occurs today. So this is a call-in show. The number is 202-570-7057. And I'd love to hear about your conversation that went wonky, or one that didn't meet your expectation, right? Or about how you pay attention to your own thoughts and feelings. Before I get started, I was reading an article today about the events of 2021, and I have to say, and I mentioned the tornadoes of a couple days ago, this has been some year. I don't know about you, but the only way I got through this year was to focus on who I loved and caring about them and valuing them, like really focusing on that, because it was a place that I could zero in and feel grounded. I'd have these moments when something traumatic was happening in the world that I felt like I couldn't affect or change, and it made my heart hurt. It made me want to crawl under the covers really indefinitely. And then I think about my closest circle and the people that make my life what it is, and my work and my purpose. And it would just remind me what was really important, where my heart was cared for. And it brought me around to those questions I asked earlier. So, I hope as I said all that you're thinking about what makes your life really meaningful, who really matters in your life, and what makes a day feel rich. So, okay, are you just trying to get along in relationship, or are you really trying to cause it to go deeper? This is the first issue. If you're going to keep things from going wonky, then you're going to want to eliminate the place where your primary motivation in relationship is to get along. It's just not a big enough bar or goal, right? Because get along means you'll overlook things. You'll overlook the things that you can build upon, because those things often look like hiccups or speed bumps or difficulties or misunderstandings. So when your focus is first to get along, then you're rendering that palette that you have to work with less color, less dimension, less detail, less investment of yours, less commitment on your part, right? You're actually setting up a kind of glossing over of what really, really matters. So getting along is not the point. Now, I want to talk about why you'd want to engage with people to create something more. It might be obvious. Well, I want to talk to them because I live with them and we have to work things out. Well, but it's more than that, because when you engage with people and life in a way that's so intentional, it gives you a place to be more alive and bring more of yourself. And when you have that, you're more likely to stay conscious and aware of what's happening with you at all times, because you're in the game and you're in it seriously. And let's face it, there's a ton of weight and reason and push for us to go unconscious as human beings. Why we disengage from the events that life throws at us? Because everything is too big and too loud and too demanding and too disruptive. So if we can't create these ripe and emotionally fulfilling hotbeds around us, I love that word, hotbed, then we miss out on having a safe haven to return to, a truly safe haven, one where we can be all of who we are, one that reminds us to stay here and stay present, right, to what's going on, to not bypass the reality of what life is all about. So no, we don't want to just get along with the people in our lives. We want to bring ourselves to them. And if we're going to do that, then it's inevitable that you're going to have communication go wonky, because you are a unique being who has different thoughts and feelings. And if you're going to bring all of that to a relationship, it has to go wonky. So a true litmus test of the nature of your relationships isn't how good they are or how well you get along. It should be the presence of wonkiness, because then you know that you're working on it, that you're bringing things. It gets confusing, or you're not sure, or you're muddling through or grappling with stuff, right? See, the presence of wonkiness, I don't even know whether wonkiness is a word, assures you that you are actually leaning in and working on creating this deeper connection. And that you're willing to wade into the deep water and not know how you're going to get to the other side. That you're trusting you and the other person to find your way out. And it might get dicey, sure, right? And it feels a bit risky to reach that place where you grow. And you're not sure how you're going to get to the other side where you're going to understand each other better, because you've only got the truth of each moment that's in that conversation. See, the presence of wonkiness is a much better way to know you're working on you. I bet I'm throwing a little bit of a curveball here, because you thought wonky was a bad thing. And I'm saying, well, actually, at the very minimum, at least wonkiness, you know you're working on something, right? Of course, what we hope for is that we get more conscious of it, so we have ways to play with it and to employ different kind of mechanisms, right? When we're in the conversation and self-information finds its way. See, we know that we human beings, we want this peace and ease. So hold so tight to your need to be alive and go towards the things that don't bring peace and ease. It's the way to ensure you're also building this deeper connection in relationship. Okay. So now that I've set that piece of the idea that you actually want to desire the presence of wonkiness, let's talk about some kinds of wonky that you can become more in touch with. So the first part of communication you want to really zero in on is what's happening for you. Now, I talk a lot about this in every single show, right? It's emotionally, intellectually, physically, at a human being level, right? Being, and spiritually. And you want to do this focusing on, how is this about me? Why is this coming up inside of who I am? Inside of how I know myself? That's right. Chris, the producer of the show, he just texted me, get in touch with your inner wonky. That's what we're doing, right? So this communication piece, when we want to talk about our feelings, a lot of times it's other focused. It's directed at telling somebody what you want them to know. But you got to get inside of you. That's where the real grit is. That's where that integrity gets set up, you know? And it's super easy when we're zeroing in on what's happening for us to see the situation or circumstance as a reaction to the other person, right? It's easy, but we don't want to do that. Remember, our reactions, they emerge from our life experience. We wouldn't react the way we do unless we had the life experiences we have. You put 10 people in a line and they're not all going to react at the same moment or in the same way, because everyone's different. And then, of course, the present, it triggers that. So what I'm saying is that you have to get into what's really happening inside your life. How is this about me and where I came from? So I'm going to give you just a small example from my life. Is on Monday night, my son was supposed to arrive home from college at 8, but he didn't get here until 10:30, and there was no call. And in that moment, I felt so much anger about being taken for granted and not considered and not communicated with, like I was unimportant. And, of course it would trigger my feelings, right? But if I'm going to go inside and see what's going on with me, first of all, I'd see everything I just described. I would notice the heat building, right? The intensity. I'd also see a lifetime of many moments when I felt like I didn't matter. Like I was giving and the other person didn't see it. Like I was left somewhere and somebody didn't care. And really, which is not my typical response, but I was fuming. Right? I have a lot of this as an aside, right? So I also could have used this moment to go and work some of those where I got overlooked moments from my past, to go into them and to re-experience them as a way to give myself more freedom. That's this growth work I'm always talking about. But in that moment, I didn't go too far into the past. I did connect with a number of these moments when I wasn't picked up at the time I was told I would be. When I loved my father only to have him ignore my feelings, and moments with my son when I wasn't considered in his thinking. So my body was wound super tight and my thoughts were working really hard to self-contain and make sure that I kept my focus on me and my stuff and where it came from, because I wanted to be reactive, right? I wanted to let loose. I know. It's like, are you kidding? But I did. I was just so riled up about it. See, I know the degree to which I can focus on my own experience, on my own life, will be the degree to which that person doesn't have to feel responsible for my feelings. So this piece really, really matters. Okay, when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about the wonkiness that was actually present inside that story and where you would go from there.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
All right, we are back. I am Sam Parrotto, and you are listening to Expedition Self. And today we're talking about what makes communication go wonky when we're trying to share our feelings. And just before break, I was owning up to how much I wanted to be reactive when my son didn't call me and tell me that he wasn't going to get home when I expected him. So in this moment, I want to distinguish the difference between the presence of wonkiness, which we're saying we want to recognize is there, and we want to go for creating dialogue that helps us get in there and sort all that out, and actually not caring about being self-responsible. Okay, so if you're someone, right, we said if you're one of those wild ones, if you're someone who's invested in bringing this high level of communication to relationships, then, hold on, I'm going to say this kind of harshly, then you're not entitled to vent or unleash on someone. You're just not, to let your energy ratchet up So they have to feel the heat of your inner self, which I definitely was feeling on Monday night. They do not deserve whatever you dish out. No one does. It's just, there's no honoring of the relationship in that. It's not respecting and appreciating their willingness to be in your life with you. And that's why this moment is so important, because you're doing something that's really hard. Right? You're saying, okay, I've got a lot of inner stuff going on. I want to actually create deeper relationship, but I am not going to allow my reactivity or what happens that I find in there to be justifiable in the way that I treat somebody. So you're inviting more feeling from inside of you, but you're containing it from unleashing itself, from like going rogue on the other person. And part of this going inside piece, it includes a very important question when you're in there, right? I'm in there, I'm paying attention to my thoughts and my feelings. And by doing so, I'm actually inviting more intensity. So one of the other questions I want to ask when I feel stuff coming up and I think I'm having feelings that are legitimate and valid, I want to ask myself, how have I participated in relationship with this person such that this is how it goes? What is the background that's led to this moment with them? Where haven't I stepped in enough? Where has conversation been missing that has this happen? What can I see more about myself or about the way I connect that's important in this moment? You know, I was in a conversation with a client today, and he said, it makes me crazy when I'm interacting with someone, and then instead of them telling me it didn't go well, they go tell my boss. Right? But when we talked about it, the question for him was, well, how is it going in relationship with them that they don't tell you and they tell someone else? That's the big piece when we're getting loaded up with our feelings, is we really want to look and say, let me see the totality of how I have been in this relationship. What is it that might be playing out here that I might even have blind spots about? See, this is when we come back to the place of original expression. So in my case, I can go along with things because I'm trying to be loving, but I don't authentically represent what I'm really needing. And this is always, always, always a place I need to look. So you also want to see where the experience you're having is one you also cause. Okay, hold on. This one is that 180-degree reflection, right? It's a super important thing to look at, because it's likely that if something is happening to you, then you've probably done it yourself. If something's happening to you, you've probably done it to yourself. So in the case where I was talking to my client, it's likely that he's had interactions with people and he went and talked to their boss. Or in my example, it is very likely that at some moment or another that I haven't called somebody else when I was going to run late. Right? And the other thing you need to think about when you're looking at this piece is it doesn't always look like the exact scenario. Right? It's not necessarily apples to apples. So I mentioned how important it is to be honest with ourselves when these things happen. Well, this is an example. This is the place where it really matters, right? It's so easy to be the wounded party, but what you want to do if you're, again, going towards wonky is to find the place where you can relate to what happened, where you've been the causer of that same pain, where you've made that same choice, where you've been involved from a different angle, so you can make sure you're not playing out some victim stuff. And so you see what you're trying to learn here. I would like to say, and it's kind of a big statement, that there is no way of being that we all haven't experienced from one angle or another. So when we're putting so much intention into communication, that's one of the things we're looking for, is finding ways to relate, to get into their world. Remember that everything that happens in life is designed to help you learn about yourself, to understand what's running you behind the scenes and the unconscious and how you are relating to life and being in it. So this moment, when you look for where you've acted in some way that's similar, it helps to see the behavior for what it is. Behavior. Okay, I just took another turn. Remember I said I was going to meander around today. So I've just talked about this idea that when you got a buildup of feelings, like the steam is rising, right? That you want to look and say, where have I actually done what I'm having an issue about? But now we're turning a little bit and we're talking about this idea that it's all just behavior. Right? What? It's all just behavior. Yeah, but isn't that what I'm having the issue about? Well, the other thing you want to notice is the way your mind wants to rationalize. Right? It might say, I would never do this to this, in this case, my son. Again, but the real question is, have you done it to anyone ever? We love to compartmentalize and say, this relationship is different than that one. But when we're raising the bar on our being in relationship, then all of them are the same because we want to bring our whole selves to every one of them. It's not like one gets more and one gets less. And this, the way our mind tries to slice and dice to avoid being the owner or the source of how things are going is just a little like sleight of hand, a kind of self-trickery, right? To keep us from really owning who we're being all the time. So there's a ton of inner work you're doing to get in touch with your feelings and your thoughts and your inexperience. And then you're self-containing the stuff that's not theirs to deal with. And you're really wrapping your arms around it as much as you can, not to stuff it, but so that it's yours. Because you won't get your arms around all of it. That's what makes the conversation with the other person so valuable. You're going to be putting more pieces together. You're going to learn more about you and about them. This kind of self-possession, it's not about filtering or about controlling the outcome. No, it's about gathering and paying attention and possessing. It's about seeking the consciousness and awareness, that's a big word, to bring to the actual conversation. So if you don't want to get really on top of what's going on below, then you're showing up. By the way, did you catch that? If you don't get really on top of what's going on below, I really love that little twist there, then you're showing up unprepared for the learning. Remember, I was talking about the kind of intention you bring to your communication. This is not for the faint-hearted or for people who just want to get along, right? And have good relationships. That's why I was here. We have good relationship, right? Till I start talking about what really goes on. Because remember, getting along is code for ignore it. So even with everything that you'll do to get ready for the communication, it's likely that you will have this part that feels entitled to unload emotionally, or to go first, or to be the one who is heard, right? Or to be the one who gets to be the wounded party, the one who is on the receiving end of the undesirable, or dare I say, unacceptable behavior. How many of you have had that thought or been in a situation where you said, this is unacceptable. This is absolutely unacceptable. And therefore, I'm going to tell you how it is. Well, the minute you say those words, you can bet that whatever conversation ensues will have you be the wounded party. And you'll either come across really hurt or really dominant. So here's the thing you're going to want to know is right here. In this moment, when you're there, you are exhibiting behavior too. Just like the other person is exhibiting behavior. So just like my son didn't call, you could say that's a behavior. I am now behaving in some way also. Yeah. I just can't stress this point enough. If we get caught up in the behavior, we're going to miss the learning. So behavior is just like it's the crust of a conversation, the crunchy outer shell, right? It's the place where you enter in because it's the most obvious, it's the most visible, it's the most tangible. But it's not the end game. And even when I say enter in, I don't have to just enter in with their behavior. I can enter in with mine. Oh my gosh, I got my head full of steam. I was all riled up. I could feel myself wanting to let loose, right? But I'm describing the behavior that I'm actually wanting to exhibit. And the more we do that, the more we set ourselves up to actually hold the kind of conversation that we're really looking to hold. So when I talk about conversations going wonky, most often they go wonky in a way that's hard to bring back because we get all caught up in the behaviors and reacting to those rather than really getting under the situation and really focusing on what is here to learn, what's in the best interest of the person I'm talking to and me, and how can we be more as human beings together because of this conversation, right? The behavior becomes a whole distraction point because it's a black and white, tit for tat, right or wrong kind of scenario. And of course, usually in there, we don't realize that we're showing behavior too in response. And that we're some way or another, there's something causing that, and we're not able to get behind the curtain on it. So when I talk about conversations becoming wonky and they're hard to bring back, again, wonkiness I still value, right? Because at least we're working on something. At least we're engaged. At least we're saying this relationship matters enough for me to talk into it. But we do want to develop these skills to be able to say, well, look at that went way down the path on the left. What do I have to bring here to like pull it back in to a space where we can understand what's happening and really navigate it and try to make our way through it. So this is a good time, right? When you might say, well, why are you in the conversation? Why are you communicating? Where are you coming from when you prompt it? Remember earlier I said we're going to talk about it where we start on one spot and then we curve back around and then we question the very spot we started on. So that's what I'm actually saying is I get myself to a place where I'm all riled up. I'm looking inside. I'm connecting it to my past. And then I notice that I'm like focusing on behavior and how much I want to let loose. And then I'm looking and saying, wait a minute, I've got my own behavior going on. This is a good time for me to stop and say, why am I wanting to be in this conversation? It's the best question I ever ask myself when I'm out in life. What am I really doing here? What am I really wanting? And where am I coming from? They're not easy questions to answer. They're just not, because I think if we're honest, a lot of times we're in conversations to get our way or to make someone feel the pain that we feel. And we don't want to admit it. We're not really willing to say, no, that's me. That's what I want. And I'm feeling it and I want you to feel it. So when you think about all the inner work that I was describing, well, you do this inner work because firstly, you care about having a more open and whole relationship with yourself, right? One that's generating new self-information and one that's also generating, secondly, is creating learning in depth with others. And that bond and ultimately that amazing feeling you get when you reach this sense of understanding and connection and alignment and openness with somebody else. Okay, so this is how it goes. We get wrapped around the topic or the behavior as the point of the conversation when it isn't. right? So if we can get through all that other stuff, which is like, well, why am I in it? Let me work on myself. Let me go inside. Let me notice where I really want to dump on them. And then really get very clear. Okay, I'm going to go into the conversation. The next thing that happens is we get wrapped up around the topic or the behavior or what happened, right? And that's not the point. So I have another client story. I've had a number of them this week. I was in a conversation and this client felt reactive because his client sent an email that only gave him 24 hours to turn around a project that he'd been requesting a deadline for like 2 months, right? So in response to this, he sends an email that's kind of reactive. And then when he shares it with a colleague, the colleague, as I understand it in a rather smug way, says, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. So this is a focus on behavior or the action or the topic. There was no place that the colleague speaking to my client actually dropped into their own experience or that they even cared about my clients. Wonky communication there, right? Good to see, important to notice, right? But what actually happened is there was no human exchange. And I describe it this way because rather than talking about it in a way that allows for growth and learning, instead it was talked about through the lens of the behavior or the action and what's wrong or right about it. Learning can't happen there. All right, when we come back, we'll keep getting wonkier.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
All right, we are back at Expedition Self. I'm Sam Parrotto, and we're talking about wonky things today. And just before we went on to break, I was really making the point that when you want to have extraordinary communication with somebody, you have to let go of being attached to what is the behavior or what is the surface action that you think the point is the point when it really isn't. Because if you want to build relationship, or be someone who really creates this extraordinary connection through communication, then getting skilled at seeing this layer of behavior and topics so that you are able to not get hooked on it, right? And keep looking and looking deeper. It's going to be key. When there's a lot of that stuff in a conversation, it gets wonkier because each part of the exchange becomes like ripe with the potential for debate. And the more you debate it, the further you get from the heart or the source of where that open opportunity really is. Okay, so I'm going to take a break here, or a little breath at least. So this brings me to my next part of wonkiness, which is debating who is wrong and who is right, rather than trying to see how the other person processed what happened, is sure to bring more distance. Should my client have sent the email? Did my son know that I would have expected to be called if he was going to be late? See, these are discussion points, but not from the place of right and wrong. More from the place of what was going through your head, or what were you thinking, or how did you put your ideas together, or what was tugging on you that had you make that decision or that choice? What were some of the things that you were feeling? What were you afraid of? So we can check out the facts in this place, but not as a way to prove them wrong or ourselves right. It's again, how can I learn about how this person thinks? Now, I want to stop right here and make a really, really important point. Okay, I'm going to say it like a drum roll, drum roll. No two people think the same. They don't process words the same. They don't make decisions from the same set of facts. They don't feel the same about a specific scenario that someone else would. And although you're probably agreeing with me as I say it, like, oh yeah, I know this, I actually notice that in reality, when people are in these exchanges where they're trying to get their feelings out, that it is one of the toughest realities for them to see. I don't understand why it is that we want to imagine that others are the same as us, or there's some commonality. Like, I would never do that. Like, if you put me in that scenario, I would make a different decision, right? That's what people say. But it causes us to have these communications from a place of expecting that someone else is going to relate similarly to the way we are. So by really getting that we're that different, that we're that not the same, we come from a foundation of being fascinated. And then we're listening for the differences in someone else's story, even if we have a whole head that's steamed up. And then we're going to be equally interested in what they thought about the thing that we're actually upset about. And this learning about how you think and how that connects to the way I think is the very reason to be in communication, to not blow anything off, to not dislodge an idea, but to actually look for how does the puzzle of you fit together. If we're going to do this, then we're also going to have to expect, hold on to this one, hold on to yourself, that our needs will not always be met, that we will be told no, that we won't get what we want. We have to be willing to go without whatever it is that we're talking about. Hard, right? That's hard, because on the surface we'll say, yeah, I could be told no, but when we really get into it, no, we're going to hear the truth about stuff. And we may not like what's real for that person. So this brings me to the next piece of wonkiness, which has to do with the actual communication when you've shared what you want and the other person is catching that ball. See, in that moment, you are listening for whether or not they really processed what you said and whether or not they could be with you and feel what you were feeling and get in your world. And a lot of times they don't. They justify, they defend, they tell you more stories. They point out what you did to bring the problem on. It's in this moment that you have to really hold the space for the conversation to develop. You have to allow, if you're the one bringing this extraordinary communication, you have to hold the space for it to go wonky, for somebody to bounce around, for somebody to work their stuff out right in the conversation. And maybe there is something you need to own. Maybe there is a story that needs to be shared in order for the conversation to expand. So I want to give you some ways to think about actually being in this part of the dialogue. All right, now these are not rules, but there's some guidelines. Only one person can be gotten at a given moment. So this means if you're the one being gotten, then any story the other person wants to be in has to wait until you can be with them. I know it sounds a bit contrived, doesn't it? But I think it's really hard to do both at the same time. Right? So I might say, listen, I want to be with whatever it is that's come up for you, but we're going to start here. Or sometimes I just start the conversation with my stuff and then I set it aside and I work with the other person's experience until they can hear what it is I began with. There are times when the response is so defensive that you feel completely unheard. So stopping to say, did you feel defensive? Or are you feeling like I'm making you wrong for this in some way? It's a way to drop into the next layer of dialogue. We want to take every awareness that we have and put it into words and create a place where connection can happen. So there is a lot of wonkiness when a conversation doesn't flow. But this wonkiness, the working around one tree, going over the pass, crossing the bridge, circling back around, it helps you learn about how someone's head works. And it helps you practice navigating this extraordinary communication that you're trying to pull off. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So through the entire example I'm providing, you're keeping that focus on what is going on inside of you. You're watching your feelings come up. And you're going to check things out that are being said. Right? Did you just say that you chose to do this instead of that? Were you afraid when that happened? And I noticed myself feeling, frustrated that would happen. But the one thing you're always wanting to go after is the learning and the resulting connection that builds relationships. So you hold tight to what your stand is. Ultimately, I'm going to say it again, we want the person we're talking to understand us better, to get in our world, to see why we reacted the way we did, and what was happening for us that was triggered. And while that's happening, we're offering up the same. But I want you to think about how often you've been in conversation and left it without getting that kind of validation and sense of completion. When we leave with the wonkiness and we don't talk it through, it's not great. It feels lousy and we're left with a choice. I mean, even if you can say, hey, we're not done with this. It didn't quite go where I was hoping. Could we talk about it again? Right? We live in a society that it's like one and done. Get the conversation over, fix it, and go on. But that's inside of, I just want to get along. No, what we want is we want to create a space where the idea of conversation is the way in which relationship happens. So having patience in conversation, it means everything. And things go extra wonky when people aren't patient and they don't have that stamina, right, to stay with difficult feelings. We're often willing to back away from conversations when it seems like we can't get this closure or understanding. But it doesn't serve us, it doesn't serve them, and it doesn't deepen what we're all about. It's kind of like building a brick wall. Right, with the mortar that gets applied in between each brick. If you forget to apply the mortar or a brick or two, then as the wall is built, there are holes in it, and it's really hard to go back and fill those holes because they've been compressed upon, right? New moments layer upon new moments, and there are holes in it, right? But it happens all the time in communication, right? When we just don't push to get to the end. That client I talked about the email and that they wanted the project done in 24 hours and he wrote it and he was kind of reactive. I talked to him and I said, well, this is a really big, important opportunity. Go talk to that colleague. He said, yeah, maybe in January or February. Yeah, that's probably a good time because I need to do it when like we're in face to face. But by then, one of those bricks is out of the wall and there's 4 more layers that have been built up on top of it. So what does completion sound like? I understand because I get that you are someone who feels this way. And this when this happened, it makes sense that you had this experience or that one. I'm struggling to really get this piece, but I do understand that, or I can stretch to empathize with you here. But what about getting and generating that from someone else? Because this is when expectations come in and the ability to handle the truth, because they may not be able to give it to you, right? It's when we ask for what we want or what we need and recognize that we may not get it. Or that we might have to walk someone through how to do it and what's involved in it. You know, hey, what I would like to hear is that you understand why I got caught in that choice or why I didn't have what I needed and you were affected by it, right? Or what had me be reactive because I felt like it was an unrealistic expectation of me. Right? This is when we give ourselves room to be human and we give other people room to be human. We're not always strong. We're not always courageous. We're not always conscious. We're not always capable. This is when we open that door. Because you can get really righteous and dominant. Right? You can ask for something from someone that actually isn't their responsibility. Like you're making them responsible for your feelings, rather than having them look at what their role is and what happened. See, when we want to get back that validation, we can get really pushy about it. So I hope you're registering how often you can be off and what you're demanding or expecting too. And so these wonky moments are all about being willing and open to see where you are off. Right? To look for what can't I see? What can I understand? What don't I connect with? It's hugely, hugely important. You know, that example with my son the other evening, there was a way that my needs got larger and larger as the evening went on. And I felt more and more demanding, more entitled to my reaction. And there was an offness to the discussion. And it was super important for me to see it if I was going to grow from it. See, this looking for growth in everything, in every communication. The goal of growth work is to find your voice, your power, your capacity and depth. And without communication, we wouldn't have an opportunity to gain from others contributing to us in that process. But there are so many individual pieces to pay attention to in a conversation. It's not like sitting down and saying what you want to say and then getting up and walking away. But people do this all the time. They don't speak unless they have something to say. And heaven help you if you try to interrupt or provide feedback when they finally speak up. The truth is that what goes on inside is absolutely reflected in how people communicate. The degree to which they are self-defended and self-protective plays a role. The way they listen and put meaning on what's being said rather than really hearing what's being said. The way they need to be unchallenged in their words. The magnitude of emotional intensity and their capacity to use words to describe it rather than act it out. The depth of their self-understanding and awareness. Their rigidity in how they see things. Their capacity to have compassion and emotion with the things they're saying. How much someone feels like they're in trouble or that they've done something wrong. A shift in heart or commitment or desire to be connected. Each and every one of those items on that list has a wonky element of it to it, and it's worthy of your study. The more you go into conversation and look for more, the more you're going to find truth and honesty about what you're doing and what you're up to. And you want to do everything in your power to not get caught up in debating and evaluating behavior, because it inhibits the seeing of the real self and the patterns at play. Gosh, I have a little bit more that I would want to say, right? But I'm going to run out of time here. So I'm going to just do this one last little paragraph, is that you want to be able to say, I am someone who wants to have extraordinary exchanges. My relationships matter. How I am being in the world is everything. Right? I hope you're able to walk away from today's conversation having one more insight to work with. And I hope you embrace the presence of wonky in a way that not only welcomes it, but fuels your own learning about how to be the source of what you want in the world. And I do have a poem, and I'm going to read it for you. It's called The Death of Dialogue by Daniel Moskowitz. I may run out of time, so if I do, I'll post it on my site. I gave the Filipino kid my email address. He asked me, "Do you believe in spirituality?" I responded that I didn't believe that what Nietzsche said is true, that God is dead. How can God be dead if we're still alive? I asked the young man. However, I haven't heard from that young man, as well as many other people who I gave my email address. So though God might not be dead, because the sun still rises in the east and sets in the west, spiritual engagement in society is dying. We rely on the leaders to fix society's problems, rather than empowering one another through direct and honest dialogue. Have a great week.